The night my family tried to destroy me was the same night I finally let them. I had been waiting for that moment for 3 years. 3 years of phone calls I didn't answer. 3 years of holiday dinners I skipped. 3 years of my mother leaving voicemails that always ended the same way: "Your sister is doing so well, sweetheart. I just wish you could find your path." As if I hadn't found it. As if I hadn't been quietly building something so large that most people couldn't see the edges of it. But that October evening, when my aunt called to tell me the family was gathering at my parents' house in Oakville for my sister's promotion dinner, I said yes. For the first time in 3 years, I said yes. Not because I missed them. Because I was ready. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. And until that Saturday night, my family believed I was 1 bad month away from applying for EI. To be fair, I made it easy for them to believe that. When I left my finance job at a Bay Street firm 6 years ago to do my own thing, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I was making the worst decision of my life. My mother cried, not out of concern, but out of embarrassment. My sister Danielle, who had just been hired as a junior analyst at the same firm I was leaving, looked at me the way you look at someone who just announced they were dropping out of medical school to make jewelry. "You have a gift, Claire," my father said, "and you're throwing it away." I didn't argue. I packed a bag, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Kitchener, and got to work. What I built over the next 6 years wasn't something I ever planned to explain to them. I started with a small property management software company, tools for landlords and condo boards that the big players had ignored. Within 18 months, I had clients across Ontario. By year 3, I had expanded into Western Canada. By year 5, I had quietly acquired 2 regional property tech firms in Calgary and Vancouver, folded them into my own, and rebranded the whole thing under a holding company that most people in the industry knew but nobody in my family had ever heard of. My company was now valued at just over $780 million. I had 41 employees. I owned shares in 6 other companies. I had a financial advisor, a corporate lawyer, and a communications team. I also had a very quiet personal rule. Nobody in my family would know any of this until I decided the time was right. The dinner in Oakville felt like the right time. I drove myself. I wore a plain gray blazer over dark jeans and flat boots, nothing expensive. Nothing that would signal anything. I pulled up to the house where I grew up, a detached 4-bedroom in one of Oakville's older subdivisions, and sat in my car for 2 minutes before going in. Through the front window, I could see the warm amber glow of the dining room chandelier. I could see my aunt gesturing with her wine glass. I could see my mother moving around the kitchen. Everything looked exactly the way it always had. I got out of the car and rang the doorbell. My mother answered. She looked surprised, genuinely, briefly surprised before composing herself into a smile. "Claire, you came." "I came," I said. She stepped aside to let me in, and immediately turned back toward the kitchen. No hug. I noted that. The dining room held 12 people. My parents, my sister Danielle and her boyfriend Marcus, my aunt and uncle from Burlington, 2 of my father's colleagues I recognized from years ago, and a few of Danielle's friends from work. The table was set formally my mother's wedding china, the cloth napkins she only used when she wanted to impress someone. Nobody had set out the good dishes for me in a long time. My father glanced up from the head of the table and gave me a nod. Not cold, exactly, but calibrated. The nod of a man who has decided to be civil. "Glad you could make it," he said. Danielle was in the center of the room, glowing. She had just been promoted to Director of Institutional Investments at her firm, a genuinely impressive achievement. She was 28 and sharp and had worked hard for it. I had no interest in taking that from her. What I had an interest in was watching how this family behaved when they thought I was still the cautionary tale. "Claire!" Danielle crossed the room and hugged me with the particular warmth of someone who knows they're winning. "I'm so happy you came. Mom said she wasn't sure you'd show up." "Here I am," I said. Her boyfriend Marcus shook my hand and immediately said, "So what are you up to these days? Still doing that tech thing?" "Still doing that," I said. He nodded in the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. Dinner was served at 7. My mother made roast lamb with rosemary potatoes, the meal she made for every occasion she considered important. We sat down, my father poured wine, and the conversation turned immediately to Danielle. I didn't mind, at first. She deserved recognition. But as the first hour passed, something else started to surface, a pattern I recognized from childhood but had forgotten how sharp it was. Every story about Danielle circled back to the comparison. When Danielle was at your age, she already had her CFA. My father said to no one in particular, which meant to me. "She's always known what she wanted," my mother added, refilling Danielle's glass. "Some people take longer to figure that out." A pause. "That's okay too." That pause. That's okay too. I had heard that sentence my entire adult life. My aunt asked me how work was going. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Claire does consulting. She's always had projects on the go." She said it the way you describe someone who makes candles from home. Fond. Diminishing. Actually, I said, I run a software company. We're based in Kitchener, but we operate nationally. Oh, like freelance development? One of my father's colleagues asked. More like a technology holding company, I said. There was a brief silence. Then my father chuckled. Claire has always had an entrepreneurial spirit, he said, in the tone adults use when they are describing a child's finger painting. Unfortunately, spirit doesn't always translate to stability. The table laughed softly, politely, but they laughed. Danielle had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Marcus did not. I picked up my fork and ate my lamb and said nothing. Because I had learned something in 6 years of building a company. Timing is everything. You don't play your hand in the second act. After the main course, while my mother was in the kitchen and my aunt was helping clear the plates, my father pulled out a folder from the bureau near the dining room doorway. He set it on the table with a kind of theatrical weight that told me this moment had been rehearsed. Since we're all here, he said, I wanted to talk about the cottage. The family cottage was a property on Georgian Bay, 3 acres on the water, a 4-bedroom main building, a boathouse. My grandparents had purchased it in the 1980s. When my grandmother passed 4 years ago, the property had been left jointly to my father and his brother. The two of them had been in an unspoken standoff about what to do with it ever since. The carrying costs have become significant, my father said. Property taxes alone are over $12,000 a year. The maintenance is another 15 to 20 annually. Your uncle and I have agreed it's time to sell. My aunt came back in from the kitchen and sat down. My uncle, who was sitting across from me, cleared his throat. We've had it appraised, my uncle said. The number came in at $2.4 million. Numbers moved around the table. Someone mentioned capital gains. Someone else mentioned the real estate market softening. It was a reasonable, practical conversation, the kind families have about assets when the emotion has finally worn away. Then my father looked at me. We did want to mention, he said slowly, that if either of you girls had the means to purchase the property at appraised value, we would prefer to keep it in the family. Danielle, we know your situation. He looked at her warmly. He looked at me differently. Claire, he said, and there was a gentleness in his voice that was more painful than anything unkind. We understand this isn't realistic for you. We just wanted to be transparent. He was not being cruel. He genuinely didn't think I could afford it. That's what made it land so hard, not malice. Just a quiet, settled certainty that I had amounted to less. I looked at my father. I thought about saying something right then. I almost did. Instead, I said, I understand. Thank you for telling me. And I took a sip of wine. Dessert was set out around 9, my mother's butter tarts, a cheesecake from a Oakville bakery, a fruit platter. The conversation had relaxed. Danielle was telling a story about a client dinner in Toronto that had gone sideways. People were laughing. The tension from the cottage conversation had dissolved. That's when my mother came in from the kitchen with her reading glasses on and a small cream envelope in her hand. I almost forgot, she said. She sounded casual, but I noticed she didn't sit down. I found this at the back of the bureau last week. It was mixed in with some old papers from when we moved. She held it out toward the table. It has Claire's name on it. I looked at the envelope. It was addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting. I felt the room shift not dramatically but perceptibly. My aunt straightened slightly. My uncle looked at the tablecloth. I reached out and took the envelope. Inside was a single page, a handwritten letter from my grandmother, dated about 8 months before she passed. It was short. It said that she had set aside a portion of a term life policy specifically for me, separate from the estate, because she had watched me work harder than anyone in the family, and she wanted me to have a foundation. The amount listed was $60,000. I read it twice. Then I looked up at my mother. Did you know about this? I asked. She hesitated for exactly 1 beat too long. I found it recently, she said again, with the old papers. My aunt made a quiet sound. Not a word, just a sound. I looked at my uncle. He looked at his dessert plate. This letter is dated 4 years ago, I said. I told you, I found it recently. Grandma passed 4 years ago, I said. This letter was written before she passed. It would have been filed with the estate documents. Silence. My father set down his fork. Claire, he said, with the controlled patience of a man managing a situation, let's not do this tonight. It's Danielle's evening. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm asking a straightforward question about a document that has my name on it. Things get misplaced, my mother said, and her voice had taken on a new texture, tighter, higher. That's all this is. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the inside pocket of my blazer. You're right, I said. Let's not do this tonight. But we both knew I wasn't letting it go. The evening broke up around 10:30. People were putting on coats, collecting bags, saying their goodbyes. I helped carry a few dishes to the kitchen. I shook hands with my father's colleagues. I hugged Danielle and told her I was proud of her, and I meant it. As I was pulling on my coat in the front hallway, my mother followed me out. Claire, Her voice was low, intended only for me. I know what you're thinking, but it's more complicated than— I'll call the estate lawyer on Monday, I said, to ask a few questions. She looked at me. There's no need for that. There's every need. She reached out and touched my arm. Her expression shifted into something I recognized from childhood, the look she used when she wanted to redirect me, soften me, bring me back in line. You've always been so hard, she said. On yourself, on all of us. Life doesn't have to be a battle, sweetheart. I looked at her hand on my arm. I looked at her face. And I thought, you hid $60,000 that your mother left for me. You let me struggle through the first 2 years of building my company without a safety net. You watched me ask my bank for a loan at 28% interest, because I had no capital. And tonight you sat at that table and talked about me like I was a cautionary tale while my grandmother's letter sat in a bureau drawer. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Good night, Mom," and I walked to my car. I called my corporate lawyer on Monday morning. Her name is Sandra. She has been with me since year 2, and she has the particular calm of someone who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing. I told her about the letter. I told her about the estate. I asked her what our options were. She called me back on Wednesday. The short version, the $60,000 had been part of a designated beneficiary payout on my grandmother's life insurance policy. Designated beneficiary payouts bypass the estate entirely. They go directly to the named individual. There was no ambiguity. The money had been released to my grandmother's estate administrator 4 years ago with a clear instruction to forward it to me. It had never been forwarded. "This is straightforward," Sandra said. "Do you want to pursue it?" I thought about my father's face at dinner, the nod that wasn't quite a welcome. The way he said spirit doesn't always translate to stability. "I want to pursue it," I said, "but I want to do one thing first." The thing I did first was make a phone call to the real estate office handling my parents' cottage listing. Because here's the part of the story I haven't told yet. 6 months before that dinner in Oakville, my company had entered a strategic partnership with a property management group based in Barrie. As part of that partnership, I had taken an equity stake in a portfolio of recreational properties across Simcoe County and Georgian Bay. The portfolio was managed under a numbered company, one of several holding structures my lawyer had set up over the years. The Georgian Bay cottage my grandparents had owned for 40 years was in that portfolio. Not because I had targeted it, because when the management group had acquired it 18 months earlier from a distressed secondary market, my father and uncle had been locked in their standoff long enough that it had quietly slipped into a tax arrears situation. That neither of them had addressed, they had flagged it as a premium waterfront asset and folded it into the portfolio. My team had done the paperwork. I had signed off on a spreadsheet of acquisitions without registering the address. I had owned my family's cottage for a year and a half without knowing it. When I found out 3 weeks before the dinner in Oakville, I sat very still at my desk for a long time. Then I called my lawyer. Then I decided to go to dinner. I called my father on the Thursday after the dinner. I asked him if he and my uncle had listed the cottage yet. He said they were working with an agent and expected to have it on the market by month's end. "Before you do," I said, "I'd like you and Uncle Robert to come to a meeting. My office, next Friday. I have something to show you." A pause. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind with a boardroom and documentation," I said. He came. My uncle came. My aunt came, which I hadn't expected but didn't mind. And my mother came, which told me she already knew something was wrong. I met them in the lobby of my building in Kitchener, a glass and steel building I had moved into 2 years ago when the company outgrew its original space. I watched my father's face as he walked through the door. I watched him take in the reception desk with the company logo behind it, the open floor plan with 41 people at their desks, the meeting rooms with their floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked at me. I smiled and said, "Thanks for coming. Let's go upstairs." We sat in the main boardroom. Sandra was there. My CFO, a man named David who has the energy of a very calm accountant and the instincts of a very sharp one, was there. I had a printed package at each seat. I let them get settled. I let them look around. I let my mother notice the framed photo on the Credenza and Industry Award I'd received last year, my name on a glass plaque alongside 3 other founders. Then I opened my package and began. I walked them through the company, the founding, the growth, the acquisitions, the current valuation, the portfolio of holdings. I was methodical and clear, and I used no drama because I didn't need to. My father was very quiet. When I got to the property portfolio slide, a map of Georgian Bay, with several waterfront properties marked, I saw my uncle lean forward. I turned to the next page. "You may recognize this address," I said. My mother made a sound. My father stared at the page. "The property entered tax arrears in early 2023, I said. "It was acquired through a secondary market transaction in April of that year by a property management group I hold equity in. I became aware that it was your family cottage approximately 1 month ago." "You own our cottage," my father said. His voice was very even. My company holds an equity stake in the portfolio that includes it, yes. You've owned it for over a year. Approximately. He set down the page. Claire. I'm not finished, I said. He stopped. The cottage has been maintained and insured under our portfolio management. The tax arrears have been cleared. The property is in good condition. I paused. I am prepared to transfer my interest in that property back to the family at cost the original acquisition price, which was well below appraised value, given the arrears situation. That number is on page 7. Nobody moved to page 7. In exchange, I said, I want 2 things. First, a full accounting of the $60,000 designated beneficiary payout from my grandmother's life insurance policy, which was issued 4 years ago and has not been received by me. Sandra has the documentation. Sandra slid a folder to the center of the table. Second, I said, I want an acknowledgement, not legal, not financial, just an acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. That's all. The room was completely silent. My uncle looked at my father. My father looked at the table. My aunt had her hands folded in front of her and was looking at the wall behind me. My mother's eyes were wet. We didn't think you needed it, she said finally. Her voice was very small. The money. You seemed like you had things handled. You never asked for help. I didn't ask for help because I didn't know there was help to ask for, I said. Because you didn't tell me. We thought. I know what you thought. I kept my voice level. You thought I was failing. You thought I'd made a mistake leaving Bay Street. You thought Danielle was the success story and I was the lesson. And because you thought that, it seemed fine. It seemed okay. To hold back what was mine, because what was I going to do with it anyway? My mother wiped her eyes. My father said nothing. I'm not angry, I said. And in that moment, sitting in my own boardroom in a building I had built from nothing, I realized I meant it. I spent a long time being angry. But I'm not anymore. I just needed you to be in this room. The transfer was handled over the following 6 weeks. The $60,000 plus 4 years of interest was returned to me in full. The cottage was signed back to my father and uncle at the original acquisition cost, a number that made my uncle exhale slowly and shake his head at the gap between what they thought they knew and what had actually happened. My father called me the night the paperwork was finalized. I didn't know, he said. He didn't specify what he didn't know: the company, the valuation, the cottage, all of it. He just said it once, and I understood he meant everything. I know you didn't, I said. I should have. Dad. I stopped him gently. It's done. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had waited 31 years to hear him say. I'm proud of you, Claire. I sat with that for a moment. I let it land. I didn't diminish it or deflect it or make a joke. Thank you, I said. That means something. It did. It genuinely did. But I want to be clear about something because this is the part I think matters most. I didn't build my company to earn that sentence. I didn't engineer that dinner in Oakville. I didn't walk into that boardroom. I didn't hand back a cottage at below market value, just to finally hear my father say he was proud of me. I did it because at some point, I stopped waiting for permission to be successful. I stopped measuring my progress against what my family could see. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already made up their minds. The version of me that walked out of Bay Street at 25, with a laptop and a concept, and not much else, she didn't need their belief. She needed her own. And somewhere between Kitchener and Georgian Bay and 41 employees in a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, I figured that out. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit close to home, you already know what to do.